Now, with views you can trust and opinions you cannot ignore, the State of the Nation, next on Derana 24. The following program on Derana 24 is classified MA. It is intended for adults and may be unsuitable for children under 17. It may contain crude, indecent language, explicit sexual activity, graphic violence, or political ideology. Viewer discretion is strictly advised. State of the Nation is an opinion-based program. The thoughts and opinions shared within this program are not intended to offend or disregard anyone's perspectives or beliefs. We aim to foster open dialogue, encourage critical thinking, and explore thought-provoking subjects. Recognizing the importance of diversity and inclusion, this program welcomes all viewpoints and cherishes the right to express them freely. This program also contains the opinions of the participants and does not reflect the views and beliefs of the Derana Media Network. The network believes in a safe space for all ideas to be expressed and on its duty to create such a platform for free speech. Viewer discretion is strictly advised.
Good evening. Weaponization of trade and Trump's America First tariffs. The new trade policy implemented by US President Donald Trump is now few days away, imposing a 20% tax on goods exported to the United States. The Sri Lankan government claims they have negotiated a better deal. However, there remains uncertainty regarding the 10% base tax. Does it still apply, or has it been completely eliminated? The US policy thus far says that 20% is on top of the 10% base tax, meaning we would still be paying a whopping 30%. This situation serves as a reminder not to place all our eggs in one basket, as diversification appears to be a more prudent strategy than relying solely on a single nation. Can our export sector endure this challenge? Or will we need to explore new opportunities for more favorable agreements? For insights, analysis, and opinions, tonight I'll speak to the Deputy Minister of Industries and Entrepreneurship Development, Chathuranga Abeysinghe, Deputy Minister of Digital Economy, Eranga Weeraratne, Deputy Minister of Tourism, Professor Ruwan Ranasinghe, the editor of Wenhua Zong-heng journal in China, Tings, Chak, Chairperson of Sri Lanka Apparel Exporters Association, Rajitha Jayasuriya, Global Business Cycle Analyst, Dr. Kenneth Zilwa, and Thoracic Surgeon from the National Hospital for Respiratory Disease in Welisara, Dr. Saman Iddagoda. Good evening, I'm Mahieash Johnney, and this is the State of the Nation. A very good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of State of the Nation. This week, we have a continuation from last week with regard to Trump taxes, which seems to have come down from 30% to 20%. Or is it still 30 when you add the 10% base tax? No clarity on that. So as always, there's a lot to get through. Let's get started. Well, for millions of Sri Lankans, every single day is a silent struggle against something relentless and unforgiving, the skyrocketing cost of living. Now, from the basic plate of rice on the table to the journey to work, from a child's school supplies to the roof over one's head, prices have surged to unattainable, unreachable heights. Salaries, for the most part, simply haven't kept pace. It's not just an inconvenience, it's a fundamental erosion of basic affordability. Families are cutting back on essentials, sacrificing nutrition and pushing dreams further out of reach just to survive. But perhaps the most heartbreaking casualty of this economic system is our younger generation. Just imagine being 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 years old. You're full of energy, aspirations, and the desire to build a life for you. Yet under these current economic conditions, the idea of buying a house or even building one from scratch feels like an impossible fantasy. The path we are on makes home ownership a fundamental step towards stability and future security, an unattainable goal for most young people right now. If you can't even afford a basic home, how can you truly settle down, build a family, or feel secure in your own country? You often hear assurances by our officials. Our government states that they are working tirelessly, implementing policies to create an environment where the economy thrives, where every citizen, especially the younger generation, can be economically viable. But on the ground, the reality is starkly different. Things are tough, and for many, they continue to get tougher. The promised future seems perpetually out of reach, a mirage simmering in a distant desert. The government says that they have 5 years, but for most families, that's a long time to survive. The vast majority of people, the backbone of this nation, are simply not seeing the benefits. This leads us to a crucial, uncomfortable question. If the current economic trajectory is making it impossible for our youth to build a future, to afford a home, to live with dignity, if it's systematically eroding their ability to thrive economically, then why on earth are we pursuing a path that seems destined to diminish the very core of our future? This isn't just an economic misstep. It's a profound challenge to the social fabric and the long-term viability of our nation. We must ask ourselves, what kind of Sri Lanka are we building? Is it one where only few can prosper, or one where everyone has a fighting chance? For the sake of our youth, for the sake of our families, for the sake of Sri Lanka's tomorrow, we must demand and build a system that works for all its people. A system that nurtures dreams, creates opportunities, and truly allows every generation to flourish, not just survive. I sincerely hope that our leaders, our politicians, are listening to the people. We'll be right back. Welcome back everyone to the State of the Nation. Now in our lead story tonight remains to be Trump tariffs and its possible implications. And last week the government said that they are truly very hopeful of striking a deal with the United States and the Trump administration, and said that they will try their best. On Friday, the White House announced that the initial taxes, which stood at 44% to Sri Lanka, is now being reduced to 20%, which is a slash of half of the initial proposed rate. What does this mean? Well, we still have to pay a new tax of 20% for all goods entering the US market, which includes mostly garments, then tea, spices, gems, coconut products, rubber, and a minor amount of fish. Our customers in the United States have already informed our exporters that they will not be absorbing these taxes to their products and jack up their selling value. Instead, the Sri Lankan exporter have to bear the cost. There's a little bit of uncertainty regarding the base tax, which was at 10%. The Sri Lanka still have to pay that 10% on top of the 20%, which takes us back to the earlier rate of 30%. The government, of course, is touting this feat as a victory in their negotiations. However, on Thursday night, Minister of Industries Sunil Handunnethi told reporters that talks with the US trade delegation fell apart and a deal was not reached Well, whatever happened within those few hours left a lesser tax rate from Trump. The government says that it will continue to have more dialogue with the US administration to ensure lesser tariffs. Watch.
Particularly, we need to appreciate and be thankful, be appreciative of President Trump's approach to facilitate and recognize the effort that Sri Lanka has put forward, and given the challenges Sri Lanka is going through, President Trump has provided these benefits to Sri Lanka. And the team from US and the teams on the ground who was coordinating from Sri Lankan side also has played a tremendous role in facilitating. Now it is collectively up to us to take those discussions to the next level, take the advantage of these benefits that we got, work with the industries, work with our entrepreneurs and businesses, provide facilities that they need, and to build up their capacities and to get the maximum benefit by capitalizing on this opportunity.
Well, that was the Finance Secretary, Harshana Surya Peruma, addressing the media with regard to the reduction of Trump taxes. Now, many countries in the region has a similar tax structure. However, several countries in the African continent has a lesser rate, which begs the question whether now most of these businesses will start to look elsewhere in places where the rate is lower. Let's get some reactions from our exporters, and joining me now is the Chairperson of Sri Lanka Apparel Exporters Association, Rajitha Jayasuriya. Thank you very much, madam, for your time. Appreciate you joining the program. Now, first of all, with this latest news, how will you continue to do business with the United States as we now have been slapped with the 20% tax? Still no clarity on whether the base tax of 10% will continue to apply, which will bring it back to 30%. Is this feasible for the apparel sector to pay?
Thanks, Mahieash, for having me on the show. And in terms of the question that you asked, the best of our understanding, 20% is the tariff rate that has been imposed on Sri Lanka. This is not in addition to the base rate, to the best of our understanding as we understand things as it stands today. However, there are other taxes or tariffs that Sri Lankan apparel exporters face in relation to the HS codes of the products that we export into the US. These are based, the HS codes are based on MFN status. And for example, say if you take a product which is a cotton product or a synthetic product, a cotton product is subject to about 5% tariffs on the products that are being exported. If you take a synthetic product, there's about a 16% tariff on the synthetic product. So the 20% comes on top of the existing HS code based tariffs that we already are subject to. Does it have a negative impact on the country? Of course it does, because up until now we did not have this additional tariff. So hence we have to make sure that there is a lot of work that we do both internally and externally to make sure that the US remains a competitive market to Sri Lanka. We can't walk away from the US. Sri Lanka as an apparel industry is exposed, about 40% of our exports going to the US. So the US will continue to be a significant market for Sri Lanka. So we have to make sure that we are developing this market and that Sri Lanka as an apparel export destination remains competitive.
Indeed, madam, the government has always been touting that our companies needs to pivot to other markets, meaning sell elsewhere. But now I feel like most Sri Lankan companies would move to other markets where the tax rates are favorable. Will our Sri Lankan companies will be looking at setting up shop elsewhere?
So Mahieash, looking at other export markets is something that has been a priority for us as an apparel export association and as an industry. We will continue to encourage our manufacturing companies to explore new markets, but this is not something that we can do overnight. These are relationships that take years to build. It's not a 1 month, 2 month or a 1 or 2 year exercise. These are exercises that take years. So while we explore these new markets and ensure that we have the right product capability within the country to support these new markets and the technical skills, We also need the government to ensure that they are supporting the industry with the right access conditions. These include ensuring that we have the right trade agreements in place with these countries, very much like our regional competitors do. While we do this, we can't neglect or overlook the markets that we are already exposed into. The US, as I said before, is 40% of our market. The UK and the EU remain significant players for us, but not significant enough. We are only exposed to the UK about 14 or 15%, and about 27% into the EU market. So we have to develop these markets. We have to be able to take advantage of the recently announced amendments to the DTCS by the UK government. And we have to be able to pivot and increase our exposure into the UK market. This is a great opportunity for Sri Lanka to increase our exports into the UK market. Similarly, into the EU. The GSP review mission was here recently, and we have encouraged the government to ensure that we don't lose our advantage of GSP Plus, and that we remain successful in this reapplication by ensuring the necessary reforms are made within the country to keep the EU GSP Plus benefit.
Absolutely. Finally, Madam, with the new tariffs coming into play, what exactly are you hoping from the government? Or do you think you all can approach the US government privately and strike up a better deal as individual businesses for your sector?
I don't think private negotiation has ever been something that's been on the cards, and it's not something that we have even explored. Negotiation has always been between the USTR and the Sri Lankan government, and the industry has continuously supported the government's efforts in negotiating successfully with the USTR. And the one ask that we would have from the government is to continue these negotiations. I believe the US government is open to continuing negotiations in relation to these tariffs, and we would encourage the government to continue their negotiations with the USTR to see if we can land on a position that is more favorable than we are already in. There is significant support that we would need from the government as well in the meantime to ensure that Sri Lanka remains competitive. Ensuring that we develop our fabric and supply base within the country is going to be something that we need to prioritize. Developing fabric parks like Eranga, which has taken far too long to get operational, this has to be made a priority. We need to be in ensuring that we are bringing the right supply base into the country and strengthening our supply chain so that we have a competitive advantage as against the regional players. We need to be ensuring that we have stable policies within the countries, whether it be taxation, currency, whether it be the utilities like electricity, bringing in the right labor reform, and looking at bringing in digitization across the value chain and making sure that a decade-long conversation on the single window becomes a reality. Alongside that, we would urge the government again to relook at the removal of SVAT, which is going to be a significant disadvantage to the industry, especially in the face of the tariffs that we are now going to have to overcome.
Absolutely. All right, let's leave it at that. That was the chairperson of Sri Lanka Apparel Exporters Association, Rajitha Jayasuriya. Thank you very much. Now let's hear from the government. Joining me now is the Deputy Minister of Industries and Entrepreneurship Development, Chathuranga Abeysinghe. Thank you very much, Minister, for your time. Now, do you think this rate is feasible for Sri Lanka to pay, even at the 20% rate? Because the apparel sector earlier, as you just saw, is already saying that even the initial 10% was detrimental to them as their clients refused to absorb the prices. Now, do you think this is possible, and would this impact our exports to the United States?
I think this whether it's 10% or 20%, the point is whether we are competitive in the region of the suppliers to US. I think the entire negotiation, not only on the government but even the apparel sector was part of it. So what we tried was to get a competitive rate, and I think we have succeeded as a country to get a competitive rate among the countries who supply to US. So basically this particular 20% is a fair deal for us to continue our competitiveness in the region. And given other countries who supply to US like Bangladesh, Vietnam and even India at a higher rate, we still feel that we can keep the competitive position, and this is the demand from the apparel sector always being give us a competitive footing, and I think as a country we have been able to do so.
Okay. Well, Minister, with this new tariff structure from the United States, there's a tendency that most of our apparel sector would actually move away from Sri Lanka. I'm not talking about the foreign companies. I'm talking about our existing apparel companies here in Sri Lanka. They might move to places like the African continent. Now, in fact, some Sri Lankan companies are already there. Now, just to get a better footing to do business with the United States due to low taxes from those countries. Now, how will the government address this drain of industries in the face of the new US tax structure?
This is not new for Sri Lanka. Even we have been operating the apparel sector for the past 3 decades. Based on tax requirements, our industries have moved various requirements. For example, the reason for move to Middle East and Africa is to get those tax breaks. But it doesn't mean that our suppliers will diversify entire portfolio to those countries because of the country risks as well. So this particular incident of US tariffs, I don't think it has a bearing on that decision, but diversifying footprint across the globe for our apparel manufacturers has been a strategy for the last 2 decades. And this particular tax will not have any bearing on that decision to our knowledge.
Okay, Minister, I know the government is currently looking at investors to come into Sri Lanka and also is looking for new markets for Sri Lankan products to enter. Why isn't this government reaching out to China on both those fronts? Because that's a sizable market which we can explore and yet haven't even scratched the surface.
Mahieash, you actually know that for many years, decades, Sri Lanka has not reached to the regional trade agreements to allow us to access the regional markets, especially the China and the East Asia and India also. Now, this government, since we came in, we are focusing on various trade agreements that can allow us for access to markets as well as to bring investment. As a small nation, the only possible way for us to expand our footprint is to go for trade agreements, and I think the agreements based on our capacity competitiveness and also looking at the local industries, government will negotiate the China-Sri Lanka trade agreement as well as look at the APAC or the ASEAN region to enter into better trade negotiations. I think that is one of the biggest priorities for the next few years for Sri Lanka.
All right, let's leave it at that. That was the Deputy Minister of Industries and Entrepreneurship Development, Chathuranga Abeysinghe, of the government's position on the plan to counter Trump tariffs. Keeping on the subject of Trump tariffs, if we are getting slapped a new tariff that will hamper our exports, one of the key questions we need to ask is whether would this bleed into any other industries. Joining me now is Global Business Cycle Analyst, Dr. Kenneth Zilwa. Thank you very much, Doctor, for your time. I appreciate it and good to see you once again. A couple of things to discuss with you. Right now, we have to pay the 20% of taxes to our exports to the United States. And there's a bit of a confusion on whether the base tax will also apply. Now, the apparel sector is already crying foul as they believe their industries is at a tremendous risk even with these lower taxes. In your opinion, to which other areas will this tariff hit indirectly and how will it trickle down to the large economy of ours who is, let's not forget, is not still servicing debt?
Thanks, Mahieash, for inviting me onto the program. A very important question. Firstly, the apparel sector is the biggest exporter to the US. It accounts for almost 2/3 of the export value in terms of dollar terms to the US. So it's a single largest exposure there. The other sectors too, including rubber and fisheries and other spices too, also are affected in this whole tariff imposition on Sri Lanka. Now, having said that, I think the bigger challenge here is, and the bigger question is that we see is the weaponization of trade, which is the most dangerous type of arrangement for Sri Lanka to be in. If the US can do it, so can other larger trade countries impose their will onto Sri Lanka and squeeze Sri Lanka tremendously. So that's something that has to be really thought through by the government. The second point is Sri Lanka is within a IMF program and doesn't have any fiscal space. Now I've seen some people advocating saying that to remove para-tariffs and ensure that the trade deficit between US and Sri Lanka are narrowed. Now, while you remove the para-tariffs, again the question is, within the IMF framework, we can't do that. Because we have to raise revenue, right? Even if it's $40 million that we'll forego in terms of taking out para-tariffs, that significant component of revenue has to be recouped by some other party or some other sector or the public in Sri Lanka. So to remove para-tariffs is not a good idea. It's there for a particular reason, and I think Sri Lanka should be cognizant of how to manage that. So these are the two key issues that we face while the US imposes tariffs on Sri Lanka and the apparel sector is going to take a bigger hit. Sri Lanka doesn't have the luxury to subsidize any sector because it's currently within an IMF program.
Indeed. Doctor, when talking about foreign direct investments, the government says that currently there are many who are coming in. But making Sri Lanka a viable destination with tax brackets seems to be a changing policy as per the needs and wants of the IMF. Now, even recently, the whole tax breaks given to China over the port city is to be revamped because the IMF said so. How will this impact future investments?
Well, this is a bad precedent. You shouldn't tamper with existing legislation, particularly on the investment side. I mean, irrespective of which government has brought in such legislation, these are legislation that are currently being enjoyed by many investors in Sri Lanka, and investors looking into Sri Lanka will be discouraged because you want consistency in policy. The IMF coming in and trying to rehash most of these current acts and incentives has a bad flavor on investment, including domestic investment, at a time when Sri Lanka needs to reassure investors and regain confidence to build a strong capital base in terms of dollar inflows. This kind of shift in policy makes it extremely difficult and extremely unattractive, and Sri Lanka will lose out in the long run as well as in the short run, because the debt that needs to be serviced has to be serviced through external finance. External finance, we can't go to the capital markets, even though again people who are close to the IMF are pushing Sri Lanka to go externally to borrow. We should not do that. We should look at creating investor confidence and bringing investors into Sri Lanka, giving them that space to set up factories and to internalize savings than to go out and start borrowing again. So these types of IMF policies is something that we have been strongly criticizing from a pro-Sri Lanka point of view, and I think Sri Lanka needs to revisit the current agreement and create that space with the IMF if Sri Lanka is serious about ensuring that debt is manageable and sustainable, because debt currently is unsustainable. Even though the IMF may say it, that it's sustainable, the numbers don't support the IMF statement.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, as always, good to talk to you, Doctor. Thank you very much. That was Dr. Kenneth De Silva, Global Business Cycle Analyst. Thank you very much. Let's take a short break, and when we return, the booming tourism industry and can the government cater to its increasing needs? The Deputy Minister of Tourism, Professor Ruwan Ranasinghe, will be here to answer that question. And later, I'll speak to the Deputy Minister of Digital Economy, Eranga Weeraratne, on the rising number of cyber crimes in Sri Lanka. This is the State of the Nation. Back in a moment. Welcome back everyone to the State of the Nation. Now there is a positive news to report tonight. The number of tourists who have arrived in the island so far this year has exceeded 1.3 million. According to the latest data by the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority, the total of 1,341,953 tourists have visited the island between January 1st and July 27th of this year. If these numbers are to keep steady, then we need to cater to the needs and wants, meaning we really need to double down on the requirements of this industry. Starting from the airport, can our current airport deal with the influx of tourists? Does it have the capacity to cater to their needs and wants? On top of it, do we have enough hotel rooms island-wide to cater to every flavor of the tourists that are arriving in the island? Let's get some information on this and how the government hopes to meet the demands of this industry. Joining me now is the Deputy Minister of Tourism, Professor Ruwan Ranasinghe. Thank you very much, Professor and Minister, for your time. Appreciate it. Now, the numbers regarding tourism is very positive. One of the concerns most in the industry have is whether the country has the facilities to cater to the needs of these incoming tourists, from the point of accommodating such large numbers at the airport to hotels. Do we have the ability, Minister, to provide the services required?
Yes, Mahieash. Now, if we take the first one is actually the facilities, whether they are enough for the targets that we have set. For example, this year our target is 3 million visitors. Out of that, already we during the first 6 months we have completed 1.25 million tourist arrivals. And starting from the airport, if we take actually the airport was designed originally for 6 million visitors per year. At the moment, it is working nearly 9 million per year. Well, there is the second terminal project work going on, and there could be actually, to be frank, during the peak season, there could be some hassle situations in the airport, especially given like we are moving on to the winter season, and there will be heavy arrivals numbers in November, December, January, and during this period there can be certain traffics. But last year also we experienced, but the project completion of the second terminal will be somewhere in 2028 as the project work progressing right now. So therefore, for this season also we can experience or expect some traffic situation in the airport. But accommodation facilities, I believe in Colombo, if we take 3,500 plus star graded hotel rooms available, but the occupancy even somewhere around 40% annual average occupancy. So therefore, rooms, I think there is no problem. Again, the tourist activities, if we take key destinations like Sigiriya, Yala, during the peak season there are certain queues we experience. We hope by introducing some QR codes, ticket issuing through computerized systems, and such mechanisms could ease on the traffic. So therefore, there are certain areas we are working on as well, but in the short run, it seems like, you know, for large numbers could be this year also some you know, queues and hassles experiences during the peak season.
Understood. Now, Minister, in terms of taxes, there's a massive worry from the boutique hotel owners to major hotel chains that the taxes imposed are way too high on the industry and their profitability margins are not enough to reinvest in better facilities. Now, what's the government's methodology on tackling that matter?
Yes, if we take actually the tax structure, it is not only for tourism, it is for entire country. It is a national policy imposed through the Inland Revenue Act. So therefore, it is not only for tourism. We know tourism industry actually has been undergoing a lot of challenges during the previous years, but now gradually we are improving on the tourism industry, particularly the numbers. So therefore, I think this industry's worry is about not mostly on the taxes, but the performance of the industry. So the performance is improving, and the taxes, if we take it is the VAT and also TDL 1%. And This is, I think it is for almost all the industries, not only for tourism, but on top of that, for tourism related enterprises, hotels especially, we are giving some concessions, especially for electricity, and also some of the registered hotels who are paying tourism development levy, we have given some concessions for importing vehicles. And also there are certain other schemes which are coming when the economy is doing well and the industry is doing well. I'm sure we can introduce certain programs for the industry to go for renovation through importing some goods and equipment from overseas on concessionary tax schemes. So therefore I think the main worry is the poor performance of the industry in the previous years, but now the industry is doing well. I'm sure all the stakeholders together, we can work well in the coming season as well.
All right, let's leave it at that. That was the Deputy Minister of Tourism, Professor Ruwan Ranasinghe. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, sir. Now we're going to take another short break, and when we return, I'll speak to the Deputy Minister of Digital Economy, Eranga Weeraratne, on the rise of cybercrimes in Sri Lanka. And later, I'll speak to the editor of Wenhua Zong-heng journal in China, Tings, Chak, on how Sri Lanka can navigate the challenging economic times ahead. This is the State of the Nation. Back in a moment. Welcome back, everyone, to the State of the Nation. Now, cyber attacks are emerging as a more pressing concern in Sri Lanka, with a notable increase in computer crimes complaints observed in this year. Now, the Sri Lankan Computer Emergency Readiness Team, or SLCERT, reports that more than 5,400 cybercrime incidents have been documented this year thus far. Now, let's bring in State of the Nation's Anuradha Wickramasinghe, who's tonight at the data board. Well, good to see you, Anuradhi. Last night we were talking about movies, and tonight we are talking about issues that are concerning our nation. Good to see you. Well, now, with these rates of cybercrime seems to be alarming. What does the data show as to why people fall prey for these crimes? And what kind of cybercrimes are we actually talking about here?
Yeah, Mahieash, as you said, we're on State of the Nation on Sunday and Showbiz on Saturday because we've got the brains and the fun, unlike what the other two on the panel can say. I'm sure we'll be hearing from them next week. But getting to the question at hand, Mahieash, you're very correct when you mentioned that the alarming rate of social media and cyber security related incidents we have seen just for this year, it's very, very unfortunate, the uptake. Just to give you a bit of context, here's what we have compiled as data over the previous years when it comes to cyber security related incidents. Over a total, we see that there's been nominal numbers in 2017 and 2019, 3,000, 4,000 odd. In 2021, there was a large jump to 10,000, and we see that the prevalence, the dominance of cybersecurity incidents was in the area of government institutions being breached. But now the case is not so, because in 2023 we see that of the 8,000 related incidents that we have seen, despite there being a drop, there's been a serious increase in social media related cybersecurity attacks. And in 2025, just to date alone, we see over 5,000 reported incidents, and of that 5,000, a large number is social media alone. And considering just how we've reached 5,000 just by mid-year, we expect this number to go up drastically above 8,000 by the time the year ends. So that's not a good trend. And this 5,000 that we see, 90% of that number is actually due to social media breaches. The other 10% is DDoS, privacy and financial frauds and the like. But this 90% we see mainly proliferated through social media, specifically when it comes to apps like Facebook. And also this alarming trend, we see this raising trend of social media parties, or Facebook parties they call it, where individuals just have a sharing of information and they meet at at very, very confusing and very suspicious timings. And also there's the influence of drugs and other narcotics as well. And this kind of unsafe environment allows the extortion of personal data and information from individuals. And it's also important to note that if anyone in your circle has a breach, that means your data can also be breached as well. There is a possibility if you have shared any sort of information. So the thing that we as individuals that are participating in social media should understand is we need to be careful with how we divulge and handle our own personal data and other individuals' personal data as well. We have to not share one-time passwords. We have to have protective double-factor authentication, and we also need to stop sharing our information or putting it down on notepads or sending it to individuals when they need it. That is one of the key ways that malicious individuals can actually get a hold of your information. So we have to be really careful moving forward, because this trend is very alarming, and we can expect this number to very well pass 2023's by the end of the year. Over to you, Mahieash.
Absolutely, those data seems to be really interesting indeed, and some gives a lot of context to what exactly is happening right now, and it is good to know that it is not as high as a couple of years back, but still the number of complaints seems to be getting a little bit more and more every year. So I think the government needs to take control of this as soon as possible. Anuradha Wickramasinghe at the data board tonight. Thank you. Let's get some answers to this issue, and joining me now is the Deputy Minister of Digital Economy, Eranga Weeraratne. Thank you very much, Minister, for your time. Appreciate it. Now, as per the details we're getting from CERT, there's a tremendous increase in cyber crimes from drug-infused parties organized via social media to identity theft, to money scams and online financial fraud. Sri Lanka seems to be getting heavily attacked on this front, just like we showed with regard to the data. Now, what exactly is the government doing about this? Any special measures taken thus far?
Yes, you are correct, Mahieash. At the moment, like we also see an increase in the identity theft and other cyber-related crimes-related things that are happening. And as from the government side, working with central bank and the SSCERT as well as other banks, we are always conducting certain communication or the awareness programs to the general public, so that public is aware when they are sharing their PIN code or something like that, that they have to be make sure that is for genuine purpose and not for coming from the unknown parties, as well as not really looking at the real message that is coming for their phones, not to give the PIN numbers to external parties. So that is one thing. Then the other one is we are working with the multinational social media platform vendors such as Facebook and so on to stop the spams as well as these frauds that are happening on the social media. So we are working with Facebook, Meta and so on to see the patterns, such crimes that are happening as well, and stop from the platform level itself. And also we are getting the facilities to the police as well as SSCERT to escalate such fraudulent activities, if they are happening in Sri Lanka, to immediately take action by Meta. We are informing them.
Understood. Minister, now digitalization is a key aspect of this government's development plan. However, events like this occurring is denting the trust the people have on a digital system. I know the current government is heavily investing in creating structures and networks to make work easy. But on the other hand, what is being done to continue to establish trust among the masses on digital platforms? For example, let's say GovPay.
Yeah, so when implementing new digital solutions, we always ensure by looking at the user journeys to see whether there are any possibility that the public could mislead by external parties and get the advantage of all this digitalization. So the user journeys we map such that it will be much easier, simpler to the public to understand, as well as when we are rolling out these digital services, we will ensure that the proper awareness programs are run, as well as we educate the public about any kind of security measures that they have to practice when utilizing those platforms. So for example, when implementing GovPay, the process is much simpler. It is no complexity at all, and once the public is making the payments to government institutions and also the recent on-the-spot traffic fine payments, the required messages are being communicated to the right institutions or to the police traffic person, so that they can verify whether the transactions are being properly made and the money is being received, and so on, and also all the reconciliation reports and all the informations are provided to the right relevant institutions, so that they can do the right correlation and the consolidation of the payments that are coming.
Absolutely. All right, let's leave it at that. That was the Deputy Minister of Digital Economy, Eranga Weeraratne. Appreciate it, sir. Thank you. Let's take another break, and when we return, how can Sri Lanka move towards an opportunity for all economic model? I'll speak to the editor of Wenhua's Zong-heng journal in China, Tings, Chak. And later, Dr. Saman Iddagoda, who's a thoracic surgeon at the National Hospital for Respiratory Diseases, will be here to talk about the alarming rise in lung cancer cases in Sri Lanka. This is the State of the Nation. Back in a moment. Welcome back, everyone, to the State of the Nation. Now, at the beginning of the program, I posed a question to you regarding the challenges our youth will face if our economy continues to go in this current path. Now, one of the biggest issues of this current economic path is the growing gap between the rich and the poor. Now, in this context, the rich continues to become richer, and the lower income class continues to grow as well. Why is this, and how can we find solutions to reduce the widening income gap? Is the IMF the real solution for that? Let's bring in editor of Wenhua's Zong-heng journal in China, Tings, Chak. Thank you very much, Tings, for joining us on this program. Appreciate it. Now, Tings, Sri Lankans continue to endure economic hardship as a result of the austerity measures and policy conditionalities attached to the IMF-led debt restructuring. Now, in your opinion, what alternative strategies could Sri Lanka adopt to achieve a real resolution to our external debt crisis while protecting the well-being of our people?
First of all, thank you, Mahieash, for having me on your show. It's an honor to be here. I think this question is a question that faces many small countries, especially in the global south. It's hard to leverage power, especially in this current political conjuncture. But we know that, of course, for Sri Lanka, external debt is a big question. As far as I know, over 50% of Sri Lanka's debt is held by private creditors and Western institutions. And we have to ask, why should the people have to pay for this speculative profit? And so I think a basic principle for Sri Lanka would be, of course, to try to reduce its exposure to external debt that many countries seeking sovereignty have been trying to do. Of course, that has to be done paired with its own industrial policies, pursuing policies such as land reform or building up certain resiliences, food and energy sovereignty, questions that are facing many small to big countries across the global south. And we know that even for a country like China, of a continental size and population, we still rely on cooperation. And that's another thing we have to think about. Partnerships with other global south countries to assist in these endeavors. And that's a more important thing than ever. And we're seeing institutions like the BRICS Plus, the expanded BRICS, and other global south institutions trying to build alternatives platforms such as the New Development Bank that are trying to be alternative financial institutions as another form to not have to rely on the Western models of IMF, World Bank, structural adjustment programs we know very well across the global south. And these kinds of institutions could perhaps assist countries like Sri Lanka to explore more things such as currency swaps, perhaps with neighboring countries like India or with China, increasingly reducing its dollar dependency. But I think saying all this around BRICS, other global south institutions, this can't just be something at the level of the states and leaders. We have to also think about how the organized social and political and people's organizations help push for this national agenda and pushing it increasingly to the left.
Absolutely. Well, finally, Tings, Sri Lanka is increasingly caught in this geopolitical competition between China, India, and the United States, with implications for its economic sovereignty and policy. Now, how can a small and strategically located country like Sri Lanka navigate these competing geopolitical interests to safeguard our national autonomy and development priorities?
First of all, I think it's really important to differentiate between, know your friends and know your enemies, especially in this age, what we've been calling at the Tricontinental Institute as the stage of hyper-imperialism. And we have to recognize the difference between what is imperialism and what is a kind of aid or kind of cooperation. The US so-called Indo-Pacific strategy is really based on a lot of militarism and economic coercion, the imposition of military bases, etc. Very, very different from, say, what China is trying to promote through the Belt and Road Initiative, through infrastructure, industrial projects, and really based on a strategy of non-interference, something we know since, the Bandung days, which of course this year we're celebrating the 70th anniversary of. And in some ways we have to recuperate some of those spirits and some of those principles of that Bandung era. And we have to know right now in this hyper-imperialist age, we're seeing increasing militarization and geopolitical pressures that are largely coming from the global north, this US-led West, right, which is a bloc ideologically, economically, militarily, and politically aligned. And so for a country like Sri Lanka, it really needs to figure out what its agenda is. And that's going to be based on what Sri Lankans decide in terms of a project for social transformation, for economic transformation, for political and economic sovereignty. And at the end of it, in this, increasing sort of heightening new Cold War that's being imposed by the US, of course, with China being the enemy, I think it's really important for Sri Lanka to assert its sovereignty and avoid becoming a pawn in this kinds of hyper-imperialist aggressions. We know that Sri Lanka, sitting in the Indian Ocean, has its location that can be an important bridge for South-South connectivity. And that's something that I think the Sri Lankan people really have to take into their hands and chart a path forward that protects their sovereignty and their interests and not be sort of taken into this new Cold War logic.
Absolutely makes a lot of sense. Well, all right, let's leave it at that. That was the editor of Wenhua's Zong-heng journal in China, Tings Chak, who's based in Beijing. She's also a coordinator for the Tricontinental Research Agency as well. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Now, on August 1st, we observed World Lung Cancer Day, and the Health Ministry has reported a recent increase in lung cancer cases in Sri Lanka. The data indicates that lung cancer is more common among men than women. With me now is Dr. Saman Iddagoda from the National Hospital for Respiratory Diseases in Welisara, where he serves as a thoracic surgeon. Thank you very much, Doctor, for your time. Now, what could be the reason behind this sudden spike in lung cancer cases in Sri Lanka?
Yes, Mahieash. In fact, this sudden rise can be due to various factors. Like if we consider the data for the past 10 years or so, when we analyze the data from the National Lung Cancer Registry, there's increased incidence or reporting of lung cancers in Sri Lanka, especially in male population as well as in female population. Now, in Sri Lanka, it is the second most commonest cancer seen in male population, and within female population, it's the 10th highest cancer in Sri Lanka. And this can be due to multifactorial, that is due to various factors. Because like nowadays that we have like a lot of screening done in hospitals and patient awareness is there, and then this increasing number of reporting. And again, we think that there's some correlation between the air pollution and reporting of these cases. And I think these are the main factors in increasing in reporting of this lung cancer. At the same time, for the lung cancers, there's a correlation with the family history and occupational exposure. Occupational exposure wise, there are some jobs that people are having some exposure to fumes, chemicals, and I think these sort of people has very high risk in developing these cancers. So I would say the reason for increasing in lung cancer rates are due to various factors, and it's a very big problem currently in the country as well as in the world format.
Absolutely. Doctor, now what are the symptoms for someone to understand that they might be a victim of lung cancer, and how can they get checked?
Again, Mahieash, it's a very, very good question, because if a person is having lung cancer, sometimes they have early symptoms, especially if a person is having cough, which is more than 2 weeks of duration, that can be taken as a red flag sign. But being a tropical country, Sri Lanka, we have a lot of respiratory illnesses. So anybody who's having a cough which is lasting more than 2 weeks, we can't consider it's a cancer. So, but I would say that is one of the commonest symptoms. So I would suggest like cough, if you're having cough more than 2 weeks duration, better to go to your family practitioner or general practitioner and get the advice from a qualified medical professional, and they will direct you if there's a need to a qualified chest physician.
Indeed, that's a lot of good information, Doctor. Thank you very much for that, because if somebody is actually thinking that they might be a victim towards lung cancer, better to get checked rather than it's too late. Well, let's leave it at that. Thank you very much. That was Dr. Saman Iddagoda, a thoracic surgeon at the National Hospital for Respiratory Diseases in Welisara. Appreciate it, Doctor. Well, that'll do from all of us for this edition of State of the Nation. Thank you very much for watching. Now, send us your comments to feedback8024english at derana.lk or WhatsApp us your feedback on 076-805-7933. Well, we'll be back again next week with views you can trust and opinions you cannot ignore. Stay healthy and stay safe. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day.